They say the sun rises every morning, that no matter how long the night feels, light always finds its way back. But they never tell you what to do on the morning when it doesn't. The day it happened, the sky stayed gray. Not storm gray, not soft gray, but the kind that feels like silence stretched too thin, the kind that makes you wonder if the world simply forgot how to begin again. I remember standing at the window, coffee cooling in my hands, watching the horizon that refused to glow. Everything looked paused, the trees, the road, even the air. And for the first time in a long time, so was I. You don't realize how much you depend on the sun until it stops showing up. You don't realize how much you need warmth until you've gone too long pretending you don't. That morning, when the sun forgot to rise, I decided I wouldn't wait for it anymore. If the light wasn't coming back, then maybe, just maybe, I would have to learn how to make my own. This is the story of the day I stopped waiting for the world to save me. The day I became my own sunrise. I woke up to the sound of nothing. Not the usual whisper of wind through the window, not the birds that sang too early, not even the hum of the city far away, just quiet, so still that I could hear my own heartbeat. It took me a moment to notice, the light that always crawled across my floor by now. The soft golden line that told me another day had begun. It wasn't there. The curtains glowed faintly gray, like the world had stopped halfway between night and morning. I reached for my phone. No signal, no time, just a dark blank screen staring back at me. For a second, I thought maybe it was broken, but then I realized everything else was too. The clock on the wall had stopped at 5:11. The refrigerator had gone silent. The air itself felt heavy, like it was waiting for someone to decide what to do next. I stepped to the window and pulled the curtain aside. The world outside looked muted. The trees stood motionless, their branches slick with dew that never seemed to fall. Even the clouds weren't moving, just hanging there, like they'd been painted on a wall. I whispered to myself, "Where are you?" I didn't mean the sun. I meant me. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. It's hard to tell time when the sky refuses to change. I tried to distract myself. Boiled water for coffee that never tasted right. Turned on the lamp even though it flickered and died a moment later. Every corner of the apartment felt colder, emptier, like light wasn't just gone. It had taken hope with it. By afternoon, the gray outside had deepened. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. The air was damp and cool, but it didn't smell like rain. It smelled like stillness, like the world had stopped breathing. Down the road, the houses were quiet too. No voices, no engines, no dogs barking. Just a silence so thick it pressed against my skin. For a moment, I wondered if I was the only one left. And then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because the sound of my own voice proved I was still here. That evening, I lit candles around the room. Their glow was weak, trembling, like they didn't want the responsibility of being the only source of light left. I sat beside one and watched the flame dance, its reflection moving in my cup of tea. That's when I remembered something my father used to say. When you can't find the sun, you light one yourself. I hadn't thought of him in years. He used to wake me up before dawn just to watch the sunrise together. He said it was proof that no matter how dark it got, something always started again. I guess no one ever taught me what to do when it doesn't. That night, I couldn't sleep. The quiet was too loud. The gray was too constant. I lay in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling that looked the same as it had all day. And somewhere in that endless half-light, I realized something. Maybe the sun hadn't forgotten to rise. Maybe it was waiting for me to notice that I'd forgotten how to. When I finally closed my eyes, I didn't dream of sunlight. I dreamed of warmth, a kind that didn't come from the sky, a kind that came from within. And for the first time since the world went quiet, I wasn't afraid of the dark. When I woke again, it was the same gray. No morning, no night, just that endless in-between. It felt like the sky had made a decision, that light and darkness were too much trouble to keep trading places. So it just stopped trying. The air in my apartment was cool and damp. Every sound echoed, even the smallest movement. The creak of the chair, the soft scrape of my mug, sounded too loud in all that stillness. I walked to the mirror, half expecting not to see myself. For a second, I didn't recognize the face that looked back. The shadows under my eyes were deeper than before. My hair was tangled, my skin pale in the gray light. I touched my reflection, and for a brief, painful moment, I thought I saw it blink out of sync, as if the mirror had its own version of me, tired of pretending too. I laughed under my breath. It came out broken, a sound that didn't belong anywhere in this quiet world. By afternoon, if it was afternoon, I walked outside again. The road stretched ahead, the same damp gravel underfoot, the same heavy sky pressing down from above. No cars, no people, no wind. It felt like walking through a paused film. Everything in motion, yet nothing moving. I passed the corner store. Its windows were fogged, the open sign flickering weakly in the stillness. Inside, the shelves were stocked, untouched. The smell of dust and paper and faint sweetness hung in the air. On the counter sat a small notebook. A receipt book, probably. But the cover caught my eye. Someone had written on it in black marker, "If the sun forgets to rise, write until it remembers." I froze. It was such a simple sentence, but it hit me like a pulse through the quiet. I took the notebook with me. No one was there to stop me. No one was there at all. Back home, I sat by the window and opened it. The first page was blank, but the second had faint writing in the corner, almost invisible, as if the ink had been erased by time. "We wait for the light too long. Sometimes it waits for us." I traced the words with my fingertip. It was strange, how something written by a stranger could feel like it was meant for me. I found a pen, and for the first time in years, I started to write. I didn't write about the sky. I didn't write about the missing sun. I wrote about everything I had avoided. The people I lost, the dreams I buried under excuses, the parts of myself I had quietly silenced. The more I wrote, the lighter the air felt. As if the act of speaking, even silently onto paper, was enough to make the world remember movement again. At some point, I looked up and noticed a faint shimmer through the window. Not sunlight, but something softer, like silver leaking through the clouds. For a heartbeat, it looked like dawn. I stood, walked closer to the glass, and whispered, "Are you coming back?" The clouds didn't answer, but I thought I saw them shift, just slightly, as if they'd heard me. That night, I kept writing. Hours slipped by without meaning. Every word felt like breathing after being underwater too long. Every sentence like a step toward something unnamed. By the time my hand cramped, I had filled half the notebook. The last thing I wrote before setting it down was this: "Maybe the sun hasn't forgotten us. Maybe it's waiting for us to remember what light means." I closed the book and exhaled. The air around me felt different now. Not brighter, but warmer somehow. Outside, the clouds stirred, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw movement in the sky. The world hadn't ended. It had just been waiting for someone to notice. It happened 3 days later. At least I think it was 3. Time had stopped making sense. But I remember the sound that woke me. It wasn't rain. It wasn't thunder. It was a low hum, like the air itself was trying to remember a song it used to know. I opened my eyes, and for the first time since the sun forgot to rise, there was color in the room. Not much. Just a faint warmth spilling across the floorboards, like the sky had blinked. Just once, before going gray again. I sat up quickly, my heart racing in a way it hadn't in weeks. The window was fogged, but through it, I saw a single streak of gold piercing the horizon. It lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then it was gone. Still I smiled. It was enough. A whisper of what was possible. Proof that the world hadn't given up completely. I spent the morning watching the sky, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. But the memory of that thin line of gold stayed with me. It was fragile, yes. But so is hope, and it still counts as light. I decided to walk again. The road was the same as before, wet, empty, silent. But my steps felt different, lighter. like I was walking toward something instead of away. As I passed the small bridge near the forest, I noticed something strange. Someone had written on the guardrail in charcoal, "Keep talking to the sky." I ran my hand over the words. They were still fresh. The smudge came off on my fingertips, which meant someone else was still here. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the silence. Because silence meant there was still room for an answer. When I came home, I opened the notebook again. The last page I had written on looked darker, as if the ink had deepened overnight. I added another line beneath it. Maybe the light only returns when we speak enough truth to deserve it. Then I wrote more. I wrote about the day my mother left, about the way my father used to laugh, about the person I used to be before I stopped believing I mattered. Each memory hurt, but in a clean way, like air touching a wound that's finally healing. By the time I stopped, the pages were full. And my hands, they were warm. That night I didn't light the candles. I wanted to see the dark for what it was, to stop running from it, so I sat on the floor beside the window, knees pulled to my chest, not writing, not thinking, just being. Outside, the world was still. But there was a hum again, faint and constant, like the heartbeat of something too big to name. And in that moment, I realized something. The sun hadn't forgotten to rise. It just needed someone to remember why it should. When I finally drifted to sleep, I dreamed of the same gold light from that morning. Only now it didn't fade. It spread across the sky slowly, softly, like forgiveness. I reached for it in the dream, and when my fingers touched the glow, it didn't burn. It felt like home. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I noticed was warmth. Not the kind that burns, the soft kind. The kind that touches your face like a quiet apology. I blinked once, and the light was real. The sun hadn't risen completely. It was weak, thin, pale, but it was there. It spilled through the window in trembling lines, painting the dust in gold. I held my breath. For days, I'd forgotten what morning looked like. Now it stood in front of me like something reborn. I whispered, "You came back." And for a second, I thought the light flickered, as if it was listening. I went outside barefoot. The ground was damp beneath my feet, the air still cold from the long gray days. The trees were glowing softly, their leaves jeweled with dew that caught the new sun. It didn't feel like the world was waking up. It felt like it was remembering itself. The road stretched ahead, bright for the first time. And that's when I saw him, a figure standing by the bend, facing the light. He was tall, wearing a long coat, his hands tucked into his pockets. I didn't know him, but something about the way he stood, still, patient, certain, made it seem like he belonged there. I called out, "Hey." My voice broke the silence like a stone through glass. He turned slowly, and when he did, I felt the world shift just slightly. He smiled. Not the kind of smile that comes from joy, the kind that comes from recognition. "You saw it too," he said. His voice was calm, quiet, like it had been waiting for this moment for a long time. We stood a few feet apart, the sun between us, casting our shadows long and thin across the road. "How long has it been like this?" I asked. He looked at the sky, as if counting the days in the clouds. "Too long," he said. "Long enough for people to forget what color feels like." I laughed softly. "Guess we're the ones who remembered." He nodded. Maybe remembering was all it took. We talked for a while, our voices the only sound in the world that seemed alive. He told me his name was Elias, that he'd been walking for weeks, trying to follow the last place he'd seen the sun. He said he didn't know why, only that something told him not to stop. And now, here we were, two strangers standing at the edge of the same miracle. By the time the sun climbed higher, the fog began to burn away. Elias and I sat on the steps of my porch. He looked tired but peaceful, like a man who had finally found what he didn't know he was looking for. "Do you think it's coming back for good?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Nothing ever really leaves. It just waits for us to notice again." His words settled into me like a seed. Small, quiet, full of promise. When he stood to leave, I felt an ache I couldn't explain, the kind that comes from remembering how connection feels after convincing yourself you didn't need it. He turned down the road and said over his shoulder, "If it disappears again, don't wait for it this time. You already know how to find it." And then he was gone. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about him, about the way the sunlight had fallen on his face, about the sound of his voice when he said my name, like he'd always known it. I opened my notebook again. The words came slower this time, but deeper, steadier. Today, I met someone who carried light in his silence. Maybe that's how it works. One person remembers, and it reminds the world to begin again. I closed the book and set it on the table. The candle beside it flickered softly, and the warmth in the room felt fuller than it had in weeks. Outside, the sun had already set. But for the first time, the darkness didn't feel endless. It felt earned, because now I knew light always returns to those who remember where to look. For days, the light stayed. Not bright, not bold, but soft and steady, like it was learning how to rise again. Every morning, I woke before it arrived, waiting at the window like a child waiting for someone who'd promised to come back. And it did. Each time a little stronger. Each time a little closer to what I remembered sunlight feeling like. But it wasn't just the sky that was changing. It was me. I started hearing sounds again. Little things. The creak of the porch when I stepped outside. The wind brushing through the trees. The faint hum of the refrigerator waking from its long silence. The world had begun to remember its rhythm. And so had I. I spent most of my time on the porch those days. Not writing, not waiting, just listening. The quiet had shape now. It wasn't the suffocating stillness of before. It was alive, breathing, almost tender. Sometimes I spoke to the air, not out of madness, but because silence deserved to be answered. "Are you healing too?" I'd ask the sky, and somehow I felt it nod. One afternoon, I found something strange near the road. A small tin box buried half in the dirt, its metal rusted, its lid sealed tight. I carried it home, washed the mud off in the sink, and pried it open with the back of a spoon. Inside were scraps of paper, folded and yellowed. There were maybe a dozen of them, each written in the same looping handwriting. Letters, unsent, unread. The first one began simply, "To the light, wherever it's gone." I sat down on the floor and read them all. They were fragments, pieces of someone else's waiting. We keep calling it sunrise, but maybe it's us who rise. The world isn't broken. It's just resting. If someone finds these, tell them. I never stopped looking. My throat tightened as I reached the last one. It said only, "I hope the next person finds what I couldn't." I looked at the name at the bottom. Elias. The box trembled in my hands. I don't know why it surprised me. Somehow I think I always knew that's who he was. The way he spoke. The quiet hope in his eyes. He had written these words long before we met. Maybe he hadn't come to find the light. Maybe he had come to give it away. I folded the letters carefully and placed them on the table beside my notebook. Then I opened to a blank page and wrote, "Elias, the sun remembered." Maybe because you never stopped reminding it. That evening, the sky turned the color of pale gold and lavender, the kind of sky you could only see after too much gray. I sat outside again, watching the light slip gently between the trees. There was a sound then. Not footsteps, not the wind. A hum, low, steady, familiar. It came from everywhere and nowhere, from the air itself. I closed my eyes and listened. It wasn't silence anymore. It was a song. The song of a world remembering itself. And I was part of it. When the first stars appeared, I whispered softly, "Thank you." The sky didn't answer with words. It answered with warmth, the kind of warmth that fills you slowly, like forgiveness finding its way home. That night, I slept without candles, without fear, without waiting for the morning, because I finally understood. The sun doesn't always rise for the world. Sometimes it rises for you. The next day began quietly, almost shyly. No thunder, no wind, no great rush of warmth. Just the faintest whisper of light creeping through the window, soft as breath. When I opened my eyes, the world was glowing. Not bright, not blinding, but alive. Colors returned in slow motion. The soft green of the trees, the golden edges of the old table, the pale blue of my cup still half full from the night before. The silence that once felt endless now hummed with life. Even the air seemed to move differently, lighter, curious, as if testing itself after a long sleep. I stood at the window, watching sunlight gather across the horizon. For the first time since the day everything stopped, I felt warmth on my skin. And it wasn't just the warmth of the sun. It was something deeper, something from within, like light remembering where it came from. I made tea and took it outside. The porch boards groaned under my feet, a sound I had grown to love. Birds, real birds, sang somewhere beyond the trees. The smell of earth was sharp and clean, like the world had just been washed. I sat on the steps, cupping the mug between my hands, and looked up at the sky. It was blue, not the dull gray that had filled it for so long, but soft, endless, alive. And then I saw it. A single line of gold cutting through the morning air, spreading across the clouds like ink in water, the sun, fully awake. It rose slow, hesitant at first, then sure, as if remembering how to shine. Tears filled my eyes before I even knew why. Maybe it was relief, maybe it was gratitude, or maybe it was the strange, overwhelming feeling that I was witnessing something I hadn't realized I needed to forgive. Not the world, but myself. I whispered, "You didn't forget after all." The sunlight hit my face and I closed my eyes. For a second it felt like an embrace, a quiet promise from the universe itself. And in that warmth, I finally understood what Elias had meant when he said nothing ever really leaves. It just waits to be seen again. He was right. The sun hadn't gone. It had just been waiting for me to open my eyes. I spent the rest of the day writing, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to remember this feeling forever. Every word poured out like breath. Every line felt like prayer. I wrote about the silence, the fear, the waiting, but I also wrote about the moment it changed, the moment the sky blinked awake, and I realized that light doesn't live in the sky at all. It lives here, in us. When I finished, I closed the notebook. The pages were warm to the touch, as if they were glowing from inside. That evening, I went to the edge of the forest, the place where I had first seen Elias. The sun was setting again, turning everything to fire and honey. I stood there a long time, watching the colors melt into each other. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to ask for anything. I just whispered into the air, "Thank you for coming back, and thank you for teaching me how to rise." As the light faded, a single beam lingered across the path, falling on my hands. It was warm, steady, alive, and as I stood there, bathed in that last thread of gold, I understood what had really happened. The sun hadn't forgotten to rise. It had simply waited for me to remember how to shine. The morning after the sun returned, the world felt brand new. Every color seemed louder, every sound brighter, but inside me something still felt quiet. I thought light would fix everything, that once the sun came back, the heaviness in my chest would fade too, but it didn't. It just changed shape, like a shadow following me through the brightness. I stood in front of the mirror again. This time I saw all of me, the tiredness, the lines under my eyes, the small, almost invisible scar by my lip. The reflection didn't look broken anymore, just real, and maybe that's what healing is. Not becoming someone new, but learning to look at yourself in full light and not flinch. I walked to the field behind the house. The grass was still wet from the dew, sparkling like tiny suns caught in green. The air was warm, but a single cool breeze brushed my hair. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of my thoughts. I let them come. Every memory, every regret, every name I still whispered in dreams. They didn't hurt anymore. They just existed, softened by the light that finally touched them. I thought of Elias, his letters, the way his voice had carried calm like a prayer. I wondered where he was now, if he'd seen the sun rise again, If he knew that his words had made someone stay, maybe that's all we ever do for each other. We hold the light long enough for someone else to find it. By noon, the sky had turned pure blue. Not the gray of before, not even the soft gold of dawn, but the kind of blue that feels endless. I sat on the porch and opened my notebook. There were no blank pages left. Every one of them was filled with the story of how the world forgot the sun and how a single heart remembered it back. But one page, the very last one, was empty, except for a line I hadn't written. The last shadow lives where the light began. I stared at it, my fingers tracing the words. They looked like Elias's handwriting, or maybe they were mine. At this point, I couldn't tell the difference anymore. That evening, as the sun began to set, I followed its light to the edge of the forest. The sky burned with gold and orange, and every tree cast a shadow that stretched across the ground. I stepped into one, the shadow of my own figure, and felt something shift inside me. It wasn't fear. It was acceptance. Because for the first time, I understood what the shadow really was. It wasn't proof of darkness. It was proof of light. You can't have one without the other. The sun had never truly left. It had just been hiding behind what I refused to face. I closed my eyes and said quietly, "I see you now." The wind moved through the trees like an answer. The shadows wavered, and the light between them seemed to pulse, like a heartbeat returning to the world. When I opened my eyes, the sun was low on the horizon. Its last rays hit the tops of the trees, turning them to fire. And in that fire, I saw everything. The pain, the stillness, the waiting, the light. All of it was mine. All of it was necessary. As I walked back to the house, the shadow followed me, long and soft, but no longer heavy. It moved with me, not behind. That night, I didn't light a candle. I didn't write. I just sat by the open window, watching the sky fade from orange to silver. The stars came out slowly, one by one, and for the first time, the darkness didn't feel empty. It felt whole, because now I knew light isn't the absence of darkness. It's the courage to live with it and still rise anyway. The night before the final dawn was quiet, not the heavy silence that once pressed against my lungs, but a soft, living quiet, like the air itself was waiting to exhale. I didn't dream. For the first time in what felt like years, I didn't need to. Sleep came easily, and when I opened my eyes, the world was already full of light. The sunlight was gentle that morning, spilling across the floor like water over stone. It touched everything: the book stacked by the bed, the small notebook on the table, the cup from last night's tea, and finally, me. It felt different this time. Not like a visitor, but like something that had decided to stay. I stood at the window and looked out. The sky was vast and calm, blue stretching endlessly until it met the golden curve of the earth. The forest glowed. The road shimmered, and somewhere far beyond, I could almost hear the sound of the sea. I whispered, "You remembered." The light seemed to hum in reply, low and warm, like an old friend smiling quietly from across the room. I walked outside, barefoot, into a morning that didn't need to be earned anymore. The dew on the grass sparkled like stars fallen from the night before. Birds called softly to one another. The air smelled like beginnings. For the first time, I didn't look for Elias. I didn't look for signs or messages or miracles. The miracle was already here, in the simple fact of light returning, and in the person I had become waiting for it. The world had remembered its rhythm. And so had I. I sat on the steps of the porch, opened my notebook one last time, and wrote slowly. The sun did not forget. It was I who stopped waiting long enough to notice it rise again. Morning isn't something that happens outside of us. It's something we become. The ink dried quickly under the warmth of the new day. When I turned the page, I found a faint mark near the corner. A fingerprint. Maybe mine, maybe Elias's. I smiled and closed the cover. As the light deepened, a breeze moved through the trees, and the whole forest seemed to shimmer with it. The shadows stretched long but soft, no longer threatening, just reminders of where the light had touched. I took a deep breath. It filled me completely. Lungs, heart, silence, soul. For so long, I had thought peace was something that would arrive when the world was perfect again. But peace, I realized, was the world as it is. Imperfect, unsteady, and still beautiful. When I finally stood to go back inside, I looked once more toward the horizon. The sun was high now, full and golden, its light soaking every edge of the world. I whispered softly, "Thank you for waiting for me." And though the wind didn't speak, it moved through the leaves with a sound that felt like laughter. That night, as I lay in bed, the air was cool and still. The sky outside glowed faintly with the reflection of a full moon. I thought of every moment that had led here, the gray mornings, the long silences, the first fragile shimmer of gold. And just before sleep found me, I realized something simple and true. The sun never forgot to rise. It was I who had forgotten how to see it. Now, I would never forget again.